You're listening to the Verdigris podcast with Rae and Andi. If you'd like to learn more about our podcast, please check out our website, verdigrispodcast.org. We're also on social media, on Instagram and Facebook. We have merch. We have lots of extra photos on our website, so please check it out. Hi, Rae.
Hi, Andi.
It is Preservation Month.
Yay! Happy
Very
May.
exciting. Happy Preservation Month. Dear listeners, you might not know what Preservation Month is, which, of course, unless you're a professional, does it matter that much? Probably not. But we thought we would celebrate Preservation Month by talking about, mostly why we do this podcast, how it came about, how we even came to preservation in the first place, and just generally talk about why we love preservation. I think it's a nice change of pace from the more technical stuff we've been discussing lately. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I'm super excited because, I want to hear how you got into it. And, I'm excited to talk about fun stuff.
It's nice sometimes to just not go too serious. And we're going to finish the episode today by talking about preservation-themed music, which is a little bit of a stretch, to be honest.
Okay, mine's not exactly preservation as much as it is just building.
Yeah.
But,
so we'll talk about that at the end.
Yeah.
But we're going to start with just Preservation Month. So I'm not exactly sure when Preservation Month was established. Do you know that information?
You know what? I don't know, actually. I should look that up.
We should probably look that up at some point. But anyway, Preservation Month is an excuse to think about preservation in a positive light. I think in a lot of ways, preservation is expensive and takes up a lot of our lives, both in good ways and sometimes a little bit challenging ways. But it's nice once a year to be like, oh, right, yeah, we do this for a reason, not just to pay the bills. Did you find it?
I did, because
Awesome.
Google
Thank
is
you,
awesome.
Internet. Yeah.
And I am actually quite surprised. So I thought it was pretty recent, but it's something that the National Trust for Historic Preservation started in 1973.
Oh, wow, it's older than me.
Yeah.
Dang, okay, well.
So, yeah, it says then also in 2005 they extended it to the entire month of May. So I guess they started celebrating in 1973.
It's historic. It's 51 years old.
It is. Yeah. Yes, that's right. It should be listed.
That's funny. So during Preservation Month, we look at a lot of preservation books.
So, I mean, it's like anything. It's like, National Ice Cream Day or whatever, right? It's like
No, it's not like National Ice Cream Day. You're being way too generous.
Well, it is in that, it's just a reason to focus on something, right? So it's a reason to focus on preservation. And when the National Trust started it as a week in 1973, it was really probably to get people to start to think about how that fits into the conversation at the time, which was about the energy crisis and, how do we kind of manage all of these things with our buildings, right? And at the time, preservation was blamed for being actually bad for the environment because the buildings were leaky and all of these things. And so they were trying to say, like, is that really the case? And let's counter this narrative. So it's just a good way to kind of put together all the cool stuff. So, I mean, I like it because it gives people an excuse to talk about preservation and to pay attention.
I agree. And especially because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what preservation is. I still have students in my intro classes who say historical preservation.
Yeah.
And I have to remind them, no. Unless you want to sound like a newbie, it's historic preservation, not historical preservation. And, the misunderstandings about preservation still absolutely abound. And I mean, that kind of leads us right into our first big topic today, which is like how we ended up doing preservation. Because I don't know, I do know about you, but I don't know, I don't think our listeners know about you
Probably
yet.
not,
but
no.
We both had pretty circuitous routes to this career, which is really common. I mean, in the profession, it's funny because we both teach undergrads in preservation, but that's just so far from the standard in the U.S. that the vast majority of people that we meet are like us in that we're like, we started at point A and we got to preservation through this like Seussian zigzag, and it was not at all an obvious, outcome.
But on some level, that's a really great thing, I think, for the profession.
Agreed.
Because people bring all kinds of things to it. If we were all trained in the same way and had the same background, we'd all approach the problems the same way. And honestly, preservation challenges are really complex, and there's lots of solutions. So I think it's really cool that people can come to it. Also, we have a lot of students who we say we teach undergrads, and I think that probably conjures up a certain picture in people's minds of, students right out of high school. And we certainly have a lot of those students. But we also have a lot of people that are coming back to school.
Lots of non-traditional students.
Yeah. And I was one of those non-traditional students when I studied preservation. So I love that, right? It's like, I don't know, there's all these names like mid-career changing and everything else, but whatever. It's people who've said, like, I love this and I want this to be part of my working career, which is really cool.
I agree. And it also means that, when you talk to preservationists, they really are going to have extremely varied views about every historic site and every approach to every historic site that you can think of. And I think that that's what makes conversations about preservation so interesting. That's also how this podcast came about, which we'll talk about in a little while. But why don't we start with both of our paths to this? And, well, I know your path, but I also know that your path was complicated. And so do you want to start at the beginning, or do you want to start at the end?
So I guess I'll start in the middle, I'll be honest.
That's the most logical, absolutely.
Yeah, it is. So some listeners, many listeners, might know that I went to architecture school because I thought I wanted to design new buildings. Like, I really thought that's what I wanted to do. I studied art history and architectural history as an undergrad, but I also minored in geology. So, I was really about the materiality, and I was super excited about this idea of creating new parts of the built environment. But when I was in architecture school, one of the ideas that really challenged me was this idea that we were designing buildings so specifically. And I was told that buildings often have to be either torn down or have major renovations in about 20 years. And that clicked for me in a negative way, where I was like, what? Why are we sinking all of these resources into buildings that we are not building to last? And it started to really make me think about the materials that we're using and the processes. And then it made me think about when I was a kid and I was like an old school recycler, right? I was like annoying my parents. This is well before you could actually put it at your curbside and have it taken away. We dedicated part of our garage or our carport to collecting newspapers that we had to tie up with twine. And then my parents were lovely, and we would bring them over to where they would gather them, and then we would get pennies for the pound to take off of our grocery. And to me, that was super important, right? I was interested in this kind of environmental aspect of saving and reusing from the time that I was a kid. And so it really just struck me as a problem when I got to be this designer, right? That I was probably going to be knocking things down. And when I tried to kind of push back a little bit, they would say, well, that's preservation, that's different. And I didn't understand why. Adaptive reuse was part of what we talked about, but really a very small part of it. So that's really how I got into preservation, is the green aspect of it. Let's see what we can save. Let's see what we can reuse. Let's see what fun stuff is out there to recompose. So in the middle, that's where I started, and that's how I got here.
Wow. That's totally different than mine, which I really like. And then, I know that you worked in DC, but not in architecture for quite a long time afterwards. Did you just decide just right off the bat, okay, well, I don't vibe with this, so I'm just going to shift gears? Yeah,
kind of. So it was part of the way through architecture school, and I had an internship, which I was actually working for a housing corporation, doing low-income housing and trying to find ways even then, okay, how can I utilize my architecture kind of language and skills in something that's more aligned with what I want to do. And it just turned out that there was a lot of uncertainty in the in the architecture world when I was applying to jobs, and I kind of really wanted to have health insurance.
Income's nice, yeah.
So I had been working part-time for the federal government while I was in architecture school, which was kind of challenging. And so I thought, I'll just stick around a little bit longer. So I ended up working for a small federal agency that worked with libraries and museums. And so that's really how I was able to kind of continue to develop my interest in, as I like to say, old stuff. But, and I got to work with people who were in old buildings and thinking through that process of how that works kind of across the country. But eventually I knew I needed more technical skills, and I just like school. I mean, that's why I'm a professor, right?
Yeah,
so I went back to school part-time, and that was challenging enough to get a master's in preservation while I was working full-time. But I knew I wanted to teach, so I knew I needed to get a PhD. And my partner, Pete, and I decided that part-time was great, but if I tried to do the PhD part-time, I would probably retire before I finished it. So I went back to school full-time, and that's how I got into teaching. And I love working with students of all ages, right? So grad students, undergrads, returning students, all the stuff, because I really get excited about exposing people to ideas of things around them that they never considered before. So when I was doing my graduate work, I was in a school of architecture. So I had a lot of students who were architects anyway, and they were still unaware of like a lot of the
I found that shocking
language.
Too. So listeners, we went to the same graduate school. Although, did we overlap? I don't think we did.
I want to say by a year. Like I think when I was part-time, you might have been just finishing up
All right.
your last year.
Yeah, so I did take at least one class with architects. It was an urban design class. And I was utterly shocked. The extent to which this was the only class that they had that really looked at history in any way. And they knew nothing of architectural history. I remember being like completely flabbergasted by this, because I just assumed, well, I mean, if you're going to design buildings, you have to understand the history of buildings first. Nope. Like that's just not taught, or at least it's an optional add-on. Basically, it's an elective course, and the architects who were in that, or the aspiring architects, I should say, who were in that course, they had no idea about architectural history, and that really completely shocked me, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I don't know if it was an elective or it was just downplayed. So, because I don't remember the curriculum very well for the architecture school.
I don't either. It's been a while.
Yeah, but when I was in architecture school, it was required, but it was definitely not a passion for most of the students. Like they did it because they had to, and not because most of them felt like it actually informed their designs, right? It was like something you had to do.
Right.
Everybody was all about design studio. But what I found was when I was designing and I was trying to pull in some of those like historic ideas, I was told I wasn't being, like creative enough, and that I was creating background buildings. And actually one of my very first crits, I'll never forget, I designed this building that I thought was great because it was pulling ideas from all the context around it. And I thought, not great, but I thought it was kind of a new way of thinking about those kind of elements, right? And the crits that they bring into architecture school start, back and forth debating, like, is that a right way to go? And do we need these kind of buildings? And, shouldn't it stand out? And blah, blah, blah. And honestly, at one point, one of the other critics said to me, like, you can probably sit down because this really isn't about your project anymore. This is, they're debating a huge philosophical question.
Right.
And so that was a little bit of an insight, too, for me, is that, like, even the use of historical kind of context in new designs is controversial, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, to me, that's, again, shocking, and yet at the same time, it's like, yeah, of course. People just don't understand the importance of the historic context until you kind of overtly say, okay, but look at this ahistorical space. How do you feel about it? And they're like, oh, I hate it. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. I think that's really interesting in that when we try to convince people, like, hey, preservation's worthwhile. Yeah. I think it's always an uphill battle when, to me, it's a no-brainer. Not because I'm a true believer, although of course I am, but because once you learn about the background of the built environment and what it does to us, you realize that, no, this changes how we feel about life. Like, this has profound implications on, how physically active we are, how much we can socialize with each other, how healthy we are mentally and physically, how well we interact with nature. I mean, all of these things are all of a piece, and, people tend to not think of it that way.
Yeah, and I think also, to me, a lot of it is a kind of a cultural bias that we have, that new is better always, and that new is somehow going to be maintenance free. And this is something that I love to kind of shatter that assumption with my students.
Oh, yeah.
There are certainly lower maintenance things, but the world is not maintenance free. And when we treat it that way, that's when we get buildings that are disposable, because we're not maintaining them properly, right? Like, we're treating them as if it's no big deal, when there's so much that has gone into that. And so we just need to take better care of our built environment.
If you maintain your built environment, it can last for a very, very long time. Possibly even, for forever. I mean, but certainly by human lifetime standards. And actually, that's how I came to preservation, is from a completely different angle than you.
Yeah, I was going to say, you have such a fascinating story.
Well, I mean, I don't know, fascinating is a big word, but but so I grew up in France. My mom's American, although she's lived in France forever. My father's French. I grew up bilingual. I went to New York, which I thought was all of the U.S., basically, a lot as a child, and I learned English quite young. But so I grew up in Paris, and I went to New York regularly, and I got to tell you, it was never even hinted to me that architecture, urban design, urban planning were possible careers. Like, it was just taken for granted that I was going to follow in my family's career paths, and I don't know, it didn't occur to me. I don't think it occurred to my parents. Like, we just kind of move forward. And now I look back on it and I'm like, no, there were so many hints that I was into this from the get-go, right? That I took public transit very, very young in Paris. I loved SimCity. I loved Lego. I loved everything about, building stuff and thinking about transportation and thinking about the built environment. But anyway, it didn't change a whole lot of anything. And I moved to New York when I was a teenager. And then I went to college, and I just, kept going forward without really thinking about it. But in college, my health declined pretty significantly, and I was going to be a set designer. And so that's how I learned to draft. I learned to draft not because of architecture directly, but, for the theater. And then my health was bad, and it was made pretty clear that, life in the theater was not going to be for me. And at that time, I was just taking a random architectural history class, and I just fell in love. And I realized, no, I know this stuff already. Like, I was familiar with a lot of it already. I already knew what I liked. I already had given it all sorts of, mental power. It just was in the background. Anyway, I graduated from college with a degree in architectural history. There were three of us, I think, the year that I graduated that did architectural history. I think it was 2. It was in the larger art history department.
That's pretty common. There's not that many architectural history programs.
There are not,
level.
No. And then I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll be an archivist or something. I don't know. So I worked at the Rhode Island Historical Society, and I hated it. So no dig on the Rhode Island Historical Society. Rhode Island Historical Society, you do wonderful work. But I thought that being an archivist would be lovely and that I would love it because you get to deal with historic documents all day, except I found it really boring. I was like, everyone's really nice, and that's not the space for me. So I also worked at the Providence Preservation Society, where I got to work with community groups and go to planning meetings and dealt with the chaos that is organizing and planning and doing all that stuff. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's cool. I like that. I like, the aggression, I guess.
You're great at public meetings.
I love it. I thrive on conflict. What can I tell you?
It's the dialogue.
I like it. Yeah. Staring at a computer all day or looking at a historic resource all day that can't talk back, that's boring. To me. So then I went to grad school for historic preservation, although, still at that point I was really focused more on materiality and less on community, right? Like it's just the program I was in was just that way, which was fine. It was good. I learned lots of background. about, things like nails and saws. But then when I started my PhD, the advisor that I had been assigned, if you're thinking about getting a PhD, this is a lesson to learn, or better yet, don't get a PhD because, oh my gosh, it's a commitment. Anyway, so the advisor I had been assigned left right before I started, so that was great. And so then the advisor that I was assigned was an engineer, and so when she wasn't at all a preservationist, she was a planner. And she was like, okay, well, do you have stats? And I'm like, no. And she was like, okay, well, we're going to start with that then, stats and GIS, and learn all the, technical bits. And I loved it, surprisingly. And I got way into the psych parts and the, quantitative analysis parts that I never would have considered otherwise, and transportation, and just learned a lot more of how everything is connected from a financial perspective, from, people's perceptions perspective, all of this stuff that I just had no background in, that I was, much more on the humanities side of things. And then all of a sudden I was kind of thrown into the science and technology side of things and psych, and I loved it. So now I kind of do all of it, right? All of the planning stuff and psych-based stuff and urban design-based stuff. And
I think that's what is fascinating to me, is that so much of what you do is not something that people realize as part of preservation or the built environment.
Right.
And so I really like that, because if they think about it at all, they often think about it as sort of an art rather than a science. And so
it's so tough because I think preservation is like the ultimate interdisciplinary field, because there's literally everything in there. There's art, there's science, there's history, there's just management, there's economics, there's, you can be super technical, you can be super artistic, you can be great with people, and theoretically you can do just one of those things, but in practice, not really. I mean, I feel like we all need skills in a lot of those different things in order to just get anything done. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is very much a collaborative kind of field, from the get-go, from your very intro level all the way up to, directors and things of organizations. And I think that's surprising to people. I think they think you can kind of do it on your own, but it's just not. It's not the kind of thing that you can do, as a single.
And that you can just be in an archive and learn what you need to learn.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously archival work's really important, and learn your cursive, everybody. But a lot of it is also super location specific. A lot of it is urban legends that you have to dig into. A lot of it is local memory and hearsay and oral history and all these other things that you have to figure out. And then it's like, okay, how porous is this brick? It's just, that's what I love about it, right? Is that you're doing something different all
every
the time, and that whatever it is that you geek out about, this is something that I don't think we're hiring anytime soon. So, but this is a question that I've asked in the past, and that I think is a really important question in preservation is, what do you geek out about? And so far, everyone I've met who is passionate about preservation has had something delightful and weird that they geek out about, right? Manhole covers or
yeah, I mean, so it depends on the day what I geek out on. But, I mean, we've, a few of the topics we've already touched on
Absolutely.
are things that I love. I mean, duck buildings, roadside architecture, neon signs, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, bridges for me.
Yeah.
Railroad infrastructure stuff. I'm on a subreddit about lampposts.
Otherwise, listeners known as street furniture.
Street furniture, yeah. That is one of my big passions, is street furniture. So lampposts, trash cans, benches. What kind of benches are actually good benches versus bad benches? I mean, there's a lot to talk about there. So
I can't wait to dig into that. I almost asked you a follow-up, but I feel like that would be going down a rabbit hole.
Be 5 hours later, we're still talking about this stuff. So what I would say to our listeners, especially those who are, long past college and are not going back to college and, have their career or maybe they're retired, is to say, yeah, I feel like that's the normal path to preservation. Is it's very circuitous, and it can feel sometimes when you're really getting kind of far away from preservation, and then you kind of circle back. And well, I mean, to me, that's part of the fun, right? Is that there's no right or wrong way to approach preservation, and I think it's the kind of thing where you can realize after the fact, like I did after the fact, like, oh no, I've been doing this all along.
Yeah.
Right. So I remember a few years ago, I had a student who graduated and then came back to visit and kind of apologetically was like, oh, well, I didn't continue in preservation. You know, I found another career. And I was like, oh, what do you do? And they said, oh, I manage a farmer's market. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That's totally preservation. That's, you know, community development and, you know, economic vitality and placemaking. This is absolutely preservation related. And they were like, oh, okay. I think you can decide on your own what the edge of preservation is, but there's all sorts of ways to be engaged in preservation that maybe at first glance you're like, wait, that's not preservation. And then you're like, yeah, it kind of is though.
I would say that probably most of the people listening to this right now do something that is preservation, because otherwise you probably wouldn't be all that engaged in what we talk about, right?
Exactly.
I mean, you know, if you are doing something that helps sustain your community or, you know, or just enjoy some of the resources that are around you, you know, that's part of preservation. I mean, part of the reason I like to teach undergrads is because I get to teach those intro level classes, right? And so I have a big classroom, and I know a few of them are going to be majors, and they're going to want to dedicate their life to this, and this is super awesome. But I'm also excited about all the people in the room who are like, yeah, so I took this class because I had to get a general education credit and you checked a box, and you know, and they'll say this in the at the end, you know, in the anonymous surveys, like, I thought it was going to really be boring, but it was actually cool. Like,
I love those. I love those the best.
I win, right? Because, you know, they realize that it does impact them. It doesn't matter what they want to do. They want to be an accountant, it impacts them. They want to be a doctor, it impacts them, right? Like, they're part of the built environment, and they realize that it matters to them on some level. And so I get super excited about, like, being able to kind of get people to open their eyes and experience.
Absolutely. And I think it gives people a sense of agency too, right? That I feel like a lot of the time, especially when you're younger, you experience the built environment in a way where you're just like, well, I have no choice. I have to live here because that's what I can afford. Well, I have no choice. I have to work here because that's the job I have. And so that means I have to take a car because that's the only way I can get from point A to point B. And it can feel really discouraging, and it can feel like you're just experiencing the built environment, but without getting anything positive out of it, and also having no positive impact yourself. And I think that once you realize, like, no, there's ways in which you can interact with the built environment and realize that you do get a say, and you don't get quite as much when you're younger and you know, have fewer options. That is absolutely true. But there are those little things that you can do that once you realize, like, oh yeah, I like going for walks, or I like, you know, taking a look at nice architecture. And then, you know, very simple things like going to a local coffee shop instead of a chain and things like that can just, you know, make you feel like you're also being a positive impact on the environment, just like hopefully the environment is having, you know, a positive impact on you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of amazing. I also like to get people to realize that everything in the built environment is there because somebody designed it, and there's intention behind everything.
Intentionality matters so much.
And you can hate it. It cannot work. It can be awful. But understanding why and what the motivation was, and I think helps people understand also what they want, right? Like,
absolutely.
If they understand, okay, this is designed for this, you know, this is designed to make cars go fast and, you know, and to not stop and all of that kind of stuff. And so I want less of that. So here's why I want this kind of thing. I think it helps them understand what choices they want to make.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is with the intro classes where, you know, we have a lot of non-majors. I try to make it clear, like, it's totally okay if you're a non-major. You know, you don't have to major in preservation. If nothing else, those intro classes, they help tell you like, hey, what architectural styles do you vibe with? What do you like? And then you can find out, once you know what you like, where you're more likely to find that stuff, right? So that if you find that you like, being out in nature in a log cabin, there's places for that. If like me, you like density, there's places for that too. And it's helpful once you know exactly what you're giving up in each one, so that it's not a surprise, right? So that you're not just like, oh, wow, I'm out in nature and it turns out I like people, or vice versa.
I think that kind of leads really into why we started this podcast.
Absolutely. So, I mean, you and I have been walking to work together. Well, okay, so we used to walk to work together. We don't do that anymore because there's a giant hill between where we live and work, like a giant hill. And so it's uphill like the whole way up. It's nice in the evening, but it's the whole way up. And we are middle-aged. And so we used to walk to work, and then recently, over the past, 2 years now, maybe?
Yeah.
We drive up to work. It's like 6 minutes. And then we walk around campus because it's flat. So that way we don't have to carry all our gear, up and down that hill every day. And we walk around campus every morning before we do other things. So anyway, we've been doing this for years and years. And so, inevitably, after talking about the weather for the 500th time, or our mutual love of carbs and cheese, and carbs and cheese and chocolate, well, we're going to talk shop because that's what we're going to do. So we've been talking shop for
almost 10 years.
Oh my God. Okay. Wow. Almost 10 years. And so a while ago we were like, hey, we should have a podcast, because what we say is super interesting.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I was like, yeah, sure, we should have a podcast. I listen to all kinds of podcasts. I was like, nobody's going to listen to us, but that's fun. Sure, we'll daydream. Let's have a podcast. Yeah.
So it was a daydream for a long time. And then I mentioned it to a very old friend of mine, Gwenaëlle. Hi, Gwenaëlle. Who I met in high school, speaking of, formative years in New York City. And Gwenaëlle is an artist, and there's a lot of information about her on the website because she is our producer as well. And so she and I talked for about the possibility of a podcast. I just threw it out there, and she was like, yes, you have to do this. And I was like, okay, whatever. Like, I'm busy with other things. And then I guess it was a year and a half ago now, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
2 years ago, she was like, no, but for real though, you're going to do this. And I was like, okay. And I was visiting her in LA, and we sat down together, and, she made me basically open a document and just start filling in information and what we would cover, and just kind of pushed me out of the nest, which was firmly needed because, I mean, we're academics. We were just going to procrastinate forever. We were.
Yeah.
Let's just be honest. That's what was going to happen. But she was like, no, you're doing it. So I was like, okay, I guess we're going to give it a shot. So that's what we did. So we just started the podcast, and
officially a year ago.
Yep. So this is officially the opening of season 2 of the Verdigris podcast. I have not listened to our first episode again.
I haven't either. I'm not really good at listening to myself. No, I don't love that.
No, so listeners, you can tell us, like, have we grown? Are we better? Is our patter like? Do we have this down now? I have to say though, it has the podcast has given me a renewed focus and interest in all of this stuff that we're familiar with. We've talked about it for years and years, but trying to frame it for an audience, and an audience that can't even see what, as we just gesture and gesticulate like crazy, I think it's really made us really grow and learn as educators, honestly. Plus, we've had to learn all the stuff related to the podcasting, which, so we're old. And so that's been a challenge, right? So I know,
good challenge.
Rae, you do all the social media, which thank you, because oh my gosh, do I not want to touch that with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
And I've been doing all of the editing, and this is another shout out to Gwenaëlle for helping me, because it's hard. Editing's really hard.
I was going to say, and I so appreciate that, because that is definitely not a skill that I have.
So Gwenaëlle herself, she is, first of all, a filmmaker and an animator and an artist, but she also has a background in the built environment. She actually made a documentary in 2011 called This Space Available. I highly recommend listeners that you watch it. It's available all over the place, and we will have a link to it on the website. Again, it's called This Space Available. It was made in 2011. It's about visual pollution, and we're going to talk about that in an episode very soon, because visual pollution is something that we deal with all the time in historic preservation, right? The idea of that, the cluttered landscape and the difference between art and signs that are just, pollution, right? Where does that line go between, something that is a net benefit and something that's just bad? And so we will talk about it very soon. But all this to say that, if you ask Gwinnetta, are you a preservationist? I don't think that would be in the top 10 things she would say about herself. And yet, yeah, she is, though, right? That's some of the work that she does is related to the built environment, related to preservation. Again, it doesn't have to be your career. It doesn't have to be your vocation for it to be something that you do. Even if it's kind of on the side, it's still something that you end up doing.
Yeah, I would say it's avocational, right? It's something that people do because they care about it. Whatever label you want to put on it, they care about something, and so they put their heart into it. And so, yeah, I love that.
Yeah, me too. So that brings us to the last topic today, which is, right, so we talked about movies a while ago. We'll talk about movies again. There are lots of preservation-related movies out there, and so that we will never run out of those, which is good, because eventually, otherwise, we're going to run out of ideas. Like we do.
I don't know about that.
Okay. It's been 10 years that we've been chatting, so
yeah.
maybe not. Maybe the listeners after a while will be like, okay, though, I get it. So one of the things that I love is playlists, right? We are both Gen X. They used to be called mixtapes, but that's been a while. I remember recording off the radio. Oh man, that was
mixtapes. My favorite part about it was to make the cover for it.
Oh yeah, and the liner
design.
notes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And of course, that paper would always the paper that came with the tape was would always smudge. So you'd be doing your like awesome art and whatever, and I'd write like Metallica with the like Metallica font and stuff really carefully, and then like wipe my hand across it, and then swear a blue streak. Anyway, but so we're both into playlists. The thing is, though, a preservation playlist is hard. I feel like there's a lot of themes out there that you can find and make a playlist out of that's going to work really well. My husband has a fantastic road trip playlist that we play a lot when we go on road trips. When we went to the total solar eclipse last year, we made a playlist. He primarily made the playlist. And because we went to Vermont, we called it Total Eclipse of Vermont.
Nice.
And yeah, it was awesome. And so, of course, that was also a song on the on the playlist anyway. But preservation playlists are hard because I feel like it is so interdisciplinary. And so I tried. I didn't do a great job at it. And then my teenager sent me one last night. She sent me a bunch of songs last night. So I want to talk about that in a minute. But do you want to start with like a couple songs that stand out to you as preservation or building?
Yeah,
or
I was going to say, so I have a preservation playlist, and I think that's where this idea started is I said, just offhandedly, I was like, yeah, I have a preservation playlist. And I think Andi was like, what? You do? And I would say it's not about the process of preservation. It's about buildings.
Right.
So that's kind of the theme that puts them all together. And I like to give my playlists names coming, I think, from the whole mixtape thing. So there's a quote about architecture being frozen music. And so, of course, I had to label it that, anyway. But
that's so synesthesia of you. Oh, and before we continue, of course, listeners, we will have links to all these songs and playlists on the website.
Yeah.
So don't worry, you can click on verdigrispodcast.org and there will be all of those songs listed so that you can listen to them and hopefully add to them.
Right. I mean, mine is, I don't know where yours is. Mine is in an Apple Music playlist.
Same.
And I think I can make that public. So that's what I'm going to
I guess I'm going to find out when I edit this podcast episode is how the heck that works. So that's another technical skill I'm going to add to my repertoire.
Awesome. All right. So, I have a whole bunch of building related kind of songs on here. Some of them are pretty obvious, but I thought I would highlight just a couple of them that I got really excited about adding to the list.
Please.
So one of them was suggested by my husband, Pete, who's also, big part of the Verdigris podcast. He designed our logo. And he is huge into creating playlists. Like you say, actually, every time we go on vacation, he's like the master of that. So when I told him about this list, he suggested a song called Teardrop Windows. And
I don't know that song or who plays that song.
Yeah, so the artist's name is Ben Gibbard, and Teardrop Windows is about a building called the Smith Tower in Seattle. And so it's a skyscraper, and it's known for its teardrop windows. And I love the song. It's it's one of those, it waxes poetic about buildings, right? So like the first part of it is teardrop windows crying in the sky. He's all alone and wondering why, it goes on. But anyway, so
I love how it kind of reminds me of the Smiths too. And it's Smith Tower. So it's a very kind of 80s emo stuff. Love it.
But it goes into like the architectural history because he says, built in boast as the tallest on the coast. He was once the city's only toast, and says it's built in 1962. Anyway, I love it. I love that song because it's something to geek out about buildings, right? It
reminds me of the Woolworth building in New York.
A little bit, yeah.
Huh. Cool.
Yeah. So that's one of my faves. Another one is called Mansard Roof by Vampire Weekend.
Okay, so I I just Googled like preservation. Preservation playlist, and I listened to that song, and I had possibly the snootiest moment of my life listening to that song because it's a good song. It's about mansard roofs.
Yeah.
But all I could think of in my extremely pompous French mind was, I'm sorry, it's embarrassing, is this poem by Verlaine called Le ciel est par-dessus le toit, which like all French students learn about, which he wrote about in prison after he shot Rimbaud. So it's all very dramatic. Anyway, but he talks about the sky over the roof and like the birds in the trees, and it's a beautiful, beautiful poem. But anyway, I listened to that Vampire Weekend song and I was like, okay, but it's no Verlaine. And then I grossed myself out with how snooty I was. I was just like, Andrea, what did you just say? I actually shocked myself at how gross. It's just gross. It's a good song. I'm sorry.
It's a good song, and it's one of my favorite lines is about the hot garbage and concrete.
I know. I'm like, yes.
Isn't that awesome?
Hot garbage and concrete's my favorite too. They're from New York, Vampire Weekend. So they're Yeah. That's an awesome choice.
And they also rhyme trees and eaves. So that's pretty excellent.
That's nice. Yeah.
All right. So and then reaching way back. So this is a song that I've always liked, and it is actually kind of preservation. Listeners, you may not know, I like Elvis Costello. I just do. And one of my favorite songs of his is called Hoover Factory. And so it's from 1980. So it's really early in his career. And it's about a factory that when it was built, it was super cool. And now, it's on the edge of a city and it's kind of falling apart. So he says, 5 miles out of London on the Western Avenue must have been a wonder when it was brand new. Talking about the splendor of the Hoover Factory. And it's about this idea that when we neglect things, they kind of fall apart. And, we build them with all this kind of, potential and excitement, and that can change quickly, right? So anyway, I really like that song, and I like, Elvis Costello. So
yeah,
yay.
Of course.
Shout out.
Wow. So I did not have a playlist about this before, so I just kind of built one very quickly, just looking at my collection of music and stuff like that, except for Mansard Roof, which I found online. But some of them, the one that immediately, of course, jumped to mind was Big Yellow Taxi, right? They paved paradise and put up a parking lot.
That's a good one.
There is such a thing as a historic parking lot, by the way. So like you can literally like now preserve parking lots if you want. So I mean, that's the one that I think jumps out. The other one that really jumps out to me is Little Boxes.
Oh, yeah.
Which is by Melvina Reynolds. I used to think it was by Pete Seeger. I think his version of the song is the most famous.
Yeah,
but,
that makes sense.
But it's a really important song about post-war America, and it's, of course, a critique, a very strong critique of suburbanization and all that. But it's a great song, even though it's kind of negative. But then, like, I was looking at my songs, and, like, a lot of them they're either very building specific, right? Like Red House or House of the Rising Sun, which, of course, are not really about houses, but you can look that up on your own. But then I found that the songs that I liked best were much more kind of vaguely evocative. So, for instance, at first when I looked this up online, it pointed out Simon and Garfunkel's song "Goodbye Frank Lloyd Wright," and I listened to it and I hate it. and I was like, but wait, I love Simon and Garfunkel. Why this song? And then I thought, like, no, I could listen to America, every day, and to me, that one is incredibly evocative and, really makes me think about the American built environment, or Paul Simon's Graceland. Oh my God, the whole album, right, is just, an ode to the American built environment and road trips and, all of this stuff. So it's like the songs that are maybe more specifically about a building don't quite resonate with me that other songs do. So there's one by the Yeah Yeah Yeahs called Subway, where you can hear the sound of the subway in the background.
I don't know that one.
And I really like it a lot. They're all super personal. They end up being super personal, right? So for instance, one of my absolute favorite songs about New York City is a song by They Might Be Giants. Now, okay, I'm a big dork and I love They Might Be Giants, but also, I listen to a lot of varied music, and there's a gajillion songs about New York, but somehow that one is the one that it connects me with my sister, and it connects me with, particular thoughts and moments in New York in a way that others don't. And the same for Paris, although I'm not going to start talking about Paris songs because I've already established super snooty.
But I think that's why actually there's such a strong connection between architecture and music. And it's not just like the mathematical stuff, right? It has to do with this personal connection that you develop. Like, that's a building I walked past every day, or that's a building I worked in, or, when I was working my way through graduate school, I actually, I worked for a federal agency, and I always like to say I was a secretary. Like, I literally made copies and got coffee and did all of those things. And, I did whatever they needed. Mm-hmm. And it was in an old building, and it was part of the National Institutes of Health, which has like a college campus-y kind of place. But this building was away from campus because they hadn't yet built a building for the part that I worked for. So they actually they built a new building. We moved there by the end of the time that I was working for it, and the building itself, they ended up tearing down. And, it wasn't a great building. It was a 1960s, like, office building. It was kind of nondescript. And I was the only person there because I was working with a bunch of, scientists, right? I was the only one there who was really into the built environment. But when they knocked it down, all these people went over and they said, can we have a brick? Can we have a piece of it? Like, it was so important to people, even though it was a nondescript building that most people said they didn't like. It matters, right? It's like a really personal connection you have with the built environment. And so I think that's why music makes a lot of sense.
Oh man, this reminds me of, and this is a great transition because I asked my teenager to come up with songs about preservation, which she very kindly did, which
that's excellent.
If you're 15, like, doing something for your parent like that, it makes me feel really amazing. Anyway, speaking of being into the built environment and it having like a meaning that isn't preordained by any means. When she was in daycare, I would take this shortcut through a more industrial area of town, and there's like a CVS distribution center there, and they had everything goes back to a CVS, right? I think we've established that. That's like one of the laws of the world. Everything goes back to a CVS. Anyway, in front of their like building campus thing, they had CVS written in gravel and rocks. And when she was like 2-3 years old, she just loved seeing, and she called them the C-Rocks. And it sounded like Xerox, which was already also funny. But anyway, so she would like, every day she just wanted to see the C-Rocks. And it was this very special thing to her. And then a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago now, maybe a little bit more, they took out the rocks and put in mulch instead. And it still says CVS, but now it's the CVS mulch, I guess. And it doesn't work anymore. And so it's this like loss, this sad loss that like, even though it's kind of still there, is not really there anymore. And this is like a whole, I really mean like nothing kind of like, this is not a piece of the built environment that anyone would be like, oh yeah, this is very important, whatever. It's not. But for a 2-year-old who was then a 6-year-old, it was. And it was this first indication that like, oh wait, these things that you take for granted are going to be there forever. They're just not. Yeah. And then once it's gone, that's kind of it, right? Yeah. Like the C-Rocks. Yeah. Sad. Okay. She created this playlist for me, and what I really like about it is that, number one, it's a lot more varied than mine, just because she's 15. So her music has things like Taylor Swift, which mine does not. I am not a Swiftie. No hate on Swifties. I just, I'm old. And other bands that are newer, although not all of them, right? So some of it is Arctic Monkeys or Taylor Swift or Harry Styles, and again, I don't know that stuff quite as well, but some of it is much older. And what I love about it, again, is that she interpreted preservation from a very wide approach. And so, for instance, Bicycle Race by Queen is one of the songs that she considers, because since she was very little, we've talked a lot about the importance of walkability and bikeability and being able to interact with the built environment. So I think that's really interesting, that it's not all like, songs that are necessarily obvious. And some of them are more things like, she also has Crosstown Traffic by Jimi Hendrix. Hell nice. Yeah. She has good taste. And so it's nice to see all of this kind of broad approach, right? Where some of it is, brick themed, like Brick by Brick by Arctic Monkeys, which I could not tell you what that song is. But then other ones are much more like about a place kind of in general, right? About what that place evokes. Yeah. Which, I think that's what music does possibly better than anything. Maybe smell gives you that evocation of feelings. And, I know that personally, having a playlist for different spaces has been very important to me in my life. Taking I'm back to being snooty again, but taking the metro back home in the evenings when I was a kid with my Walkman, I had a Dire Straits tape. And I just loved listening to Dire Straits, just walking home alone in the evening after the metro. It's weird because it gives me this connection to Paris that is a British band, so kind of strange a little bit, but for me it totally worked, and I still associate those things, right? And that there's still things that I want to listen to when I want to feel that sense of nostalgia. Yeah. And so I think of that walk home listening to that particular album. And, I think many of us, if not most of us, are like that, where we think, oh, wow, yeah, that's a great feeling. It's like you're just, walking home from whatever, or you're just, taking a bike ride, and this is what you're listening to, and this is what you're seeing. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think modern music in particular has that connection now, because before we had those personal devices where, all of us are listening to something different in the same space, we didn't have that kind of connection. But now you've kind of curated the sound that you associate with that physical space, and it's very personal and strong, and I love that. That's great.
Yeah. So we encourage you listeners to, well, number one, please go to our website, check out those playlists, check out those songs. But also, are there songs that really resonate with you, that really evoke a particular built environment to you, or maybe the act of preservation itself? We would love to hear it and learn about new music.
Yeah, please share.
Because we're a little bit set in our ways. So we would love to learn new music. Maybe you can, get me into Taylor Swift. I don't know.
Excellent. So listeners, thank you so much for joining us for this little nostalgic trip to celebrate Preservation Month. We hope that you go out and look at your built environment and appreciate or dislike something that you see, and just allow yourself to enjoy all of those personal connections that we all make to our built environment and celebrate preservation. Thanks.
And we'll see you next month. Bye, Rae.
Bye, Andi.